Welcome again to Breakfast with Bob. We're here at the Challenge Laguna Phuket Triathlon, which is coming up this Sunday, December 1st. And our next guest, who I'd have to say is probably the most successful sports agent in triathlon history, 50 world championship titles, and the guy who was probably one of the first to put his body in this water and bring triathlon to this part of the world. How you doing? Murphy Reinschreiber is our guest.
Great, Bob. Great to see you in this part of the world.
The last time I was here was when you brought me over for the first ever here. What was that? Was that 20 years ago?
20 years ago. This is the 20th anniversary.
Give us a little background on how all this started. What brought you over here to begin with, and what led to the creation of the first ever?
Well, this all started with a 2-hour and 15-minute phone call, during which time I spoke for maybe 5 minutes, and that's being charitable.
With who?
But the phone call came from New York, and it was from Alvin Chris at IMG. And Alvin was a very interesting guy with sort of a checkered past,
Yes.
if you follow track and field.
Yeah.
And a bit of a cartoon character, but a really, really heartfelt, nice guy who...
Bright man.
Very bright man. And what had happened was that there was a woman at this resort named Joanna Lau who got this bright idea, and this is in 1992.
Right.
That triathlon would be great for this resort. And what you look around and see now is nothing like what it was in 1992. I mean, the hotels had just been finished. This was a little bit like Disneyland, in the 50s, before all Orange County grew up around it.
Right.
But she got this idea that triathlon would be fabulous, a way to promote this resort. So she got a hold of a guy that you and I both know named Jim Curl.
Yes.
And asked Jim, who was running USTS at that time, what about a triathlon in Phuket, Thailand? And Jim really didn't have the capabilities of producing an event here, so he took it to ITU.
Right.
And you have to keep in mind that this is Les McDonald's ITU, not the current version of ITU.
Warmer, friendlier, cuddlier,
So things went a long way with ITU, and then the contract came from ITU. And Joanna Lau was not an experienced sports marketer by any means, but she could smell a contract that wasn't right when she saw it.
Right.
And so she took it to IMG in Singapore, who were the only sports marketing people she knew because of a golf tournament that was hosted here. And there was a guy in Singapore named Mike Riley, not the same Mike Riley that you and I both know, who knew nothing about triathlon, but called Alvin in New York, who was the head of what's now become their mass participation division. And Alvin knew nothing about triathlon,
Right.
But his secretary did, and a girl by the name of Diana.
Okay.
And Diana I had met at Nice Triathlon, and so she called me and said, would you talk to Alvin? So next thing I know, Alvin talked to me for most of 2 hours and 15 minutes. Yeah. And really the next thing I knew, I was on a plane to come here and to take a look and see what couldn't be done here. And, it was a crazy idea at the time because this was... this was an outpost. I mean, quite honestly, it was nothing like it is now. There was no one here that swam, ran, or biked.
Right.
And it was just this sort of insane idea that we decided to go with.
And that first race, if I'm not mistaken, I think Mike Pigg was here. It was Mike Pigg.
The years blur, but I do believe that Kunmu, as he's known here.
Okay.
Mike Pigg was here, and I think he did win the first race.
I think he was chased by an oxen somewhere on the course.
No, that story is that Pigg had the lead on the run, and that Mark was closing him down, but Mark had to wait for a herd of water buffalo to cross the trail, and ended up losing the race by 8 seconds or 6 seconds or something.
Mike paid those guys off later.
Right.
Love that.
Yeah. Extra hay for those buffaloes.
So watching the progression of not just this event, but just triathlon throughout Asia, what are your thoughts?
Well, Bob, you've been in pretty much the same position that I have, is that we did triathlon when it was a one night Wednesday event.
The earth was still cooling.
Yeah, in Fiesta Island.
Right.
And it was just something that runners did once a summer to have something else to do.
Right.
And so it's just been an unbelievable ride to go from that to where we are now, through the development of the Olympics, and now we've got these global series, of which Challenge is one, and the sport here in Asia used to be just a small herd of expats that went race to race to race.
Yes.
And I was just happy. One of the reasons I wanted to go to the bike practice start was just to look at faces today, and I'm happy to say I didn't recognize very many of the faces.
So new people.
And that's all new people that's coming into the sport, and that's really fantastic.
That's really what it's all about.
It's got to be what it's all about.
So you've been involved with Challenge now for a while. You were in Challenge Roth, and what's the vision for the series?
Well, the vision for the series is to give athletes a real alternative in terms of racing. It's a different attitude. The distances may be the same as other series, but the way we produce races, the way we deal with people, the way we maintain relationships, it's all different. In a lot of ways, it's a throwback to the reasons that you and I got involved in the first place. As Felix, who's our owner, says, when people ask him what challenge is, he says, well, just close your eyes and remember all the reasons you got involved in triathlon in the first place, and that's what challenge is. And there's a lot of truth to that. I mean, we really try to live up to that vision that Felix has.
You know, it's interesting because sometimes I hear people say, oh, there's Ironman and they're at war with challenge and it's one or the other. You know, my feeling is the same way that you have power bar, you have cliff bar, you need, for there to be a category in the sport of triathlon, you need options. So to me, is everybody getting along? Is that something that can everybody coexist?
Well, I'd like to think we can all coexist. Yeah. And, you know, this comes back to that old philosophy that Les McDonald and Carl Thomas had, that triathlon was a very small pie.
Yes.
And that if I took a piece of that pie, I was taking it out of their mouth.
Gotcha.
And I think that the history of the sport has proven that theory isn't true.
It isn't true.
The better that you do and the better that I do, the better we all do.
We make the pie bigger.
Right. The pie gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And at least our perspective is that.
Right.
And of course, it takes two to tango. It takes two to be peaceful. And if other parties in the sport don't feel that way, well, that's on them. We're just trying to go out and provide a real alternative for athletes. A different flavor of triathlon.
Right. You come from Ironman.
Yes.
You were at Ironman for a number of years.
Right.
Is coming from Ironman, is it hard to be at what is perceived as a competition?
It's not hard. It's a job that I get up every morning and I'm happy to open my computer.
Yeah.
And I'm happy to read my email because I know at the end of the day we're going to do the right things for the right reasons. So I'm not being asked to do hard, distasteful things.
Right.
But at the same time, it's a little bit like bringing a knife to a gunfight. You know, in terms of
in terms of
trying to grow a
right.
brand in a brand in the face of what's really a major international brand.
Well, yeah, you've got a brand that's been around forever and ever.
Forever.
And ever. In terms of the challenge events, you have Foster, which has a great history.
Right.
You have Penticton. You've got Laguna Phuket, which again, these are all people think of challenges, sort of new events. Roth. These are all events that have been on the world scene for a long time. Mm-hmm. Right? Is that
right? Well, it's funny because Challenge as a brand has only been around 11 years.
Yeah.
But I consider Challenge to be the authentic triathlon brand. And the reason I say that is just the points that you made, is if you look at Foster, which was the original long-distance venue in Australia, is now a Challenge brand.
Right.
Almere and Roth, which were the two original long-distance venues in Europe, are now Challenge races. Right. Penticton in North America was the original long-distance triathlon venue.
Yes.
And then again here, this was the first major international triathlon in at least South Asia.
Right.
And so all these brands and then people, some dinosaurs like me and other people that have been involved in the sport for a long time, Peter Henning, others have all sort of migrated over to the Challenge brand, and I think we can make the claim that we're the authentic brand because of all the people and things that have coalesced around us.
So, Murph, when I look back at your career, and one of the things that always impressed me, you were always a guy who thought outside the box. Bringing a company like Mrs. T's Pierogies into the sport, who would have ever thought about that? But just what you created with your athletes, you created longevity. When you talk about Paul Nimby Fraser and Heather Fuhr and Laurie Bowden and Peter Reed, those were athletes who weren't just coming in and having a little success and going away. What was your philosophy as an agent in terms of trying to create a brand around those athletes, because you were very successful at it?
I think it's really three things, and one was a character test. And not that there was an actual test, but at the end of the day, triathlon's a long, hard, cruel sport.
Right.
And it takes a certain strength of character to be able to succeed at it. And whatever skills I had or didn't have, I think I had a knack for talking to an athlete and being able to understand intuitively whether or not they were strong enough of character to succeed. Mm. And so that was one thing. The second thing is that I often said I had a big sign behind my desk. It wasn't really there, but I'd like to say it was there, that said winning's only 50% of your job. And athletes that didn't understand that non-existent sign.
Right.
You know, there's a place for them in this sport, but there's not a place in the sponsor world for them, because you have to. We're not a sport where the celebrities are so big that people pay you just to be a celebrity. You still have to work for a living, and do the right things for the right reasons. And then that thing, what I just said, would be the third thing, and that is to do the right things for the right reasons, to make good decisions, to make good long-term decisions, and not to be sort of swayed by, you know, somebody offers you a $500 bill, but it takes you completely off track in
Right.
terms of what you're trying to accomplish for the year. So I think it's those three things that that added up to successful long careers for athletes.
I remember we did a radio interview years and years ago, and I asked you, I said, here, you got two great women in this sport. You got Paula V. Frazier and Erin Baker. They're both great. I think Paula makes more dollars.
Mm-hmm.
And you said something that has always stayed with me. You said, as an athlete, the only thing you're really entitled to, you're entitled to the prize money that comes
Right.
with it. Everything else you get is about your looks, about what your personality, about how sponsor-centric you are.
Right.
And that always resonated with me. Was that difficult for you to get across to your athletes, that they needed to be more than just an athlete?
No, and maybe I did a good job of picking athletes, but that's true. I mean, what I used to say is that winning only entitles you to the paycheck. That's all
Right.
you're entitled to.
Yeah.
And the Aaron Paula thing was sort of the greatest dichotomy ever, really, in the sport, because in many ways, I don't think anybody would debate this. Erin Baker was maybe the greatest athlete that ever did this sport.
She's phenomenal.
And anytime Paula brought her down, it was you know, it was a monumental feat,
Absolutely.
and almost unbelievable that she
Yeah.
could beat her.
Yeah.
And Erin was an interesting woman who didn't understand the realities of the marketplace. I know early on in her career she got a huge contract with Le Coq Sportif.
Yes.
And maybe her takeaway from that is that I'm entitled to if I win, I'm entitled to the sponsorships. But the sport changed over time, and I don't think Erin's philosophy changed over time. And it was just interesting to see that, you know, Paula would do better and better and better
Right.
with sponsors, and Erin
Yeah.
just seemed to completely tail off. It's almost like she rebelled against the concept of presenting herself well and dealing with people on a friendly basis all the time, you know, those sorts of things.
The other thing that was always interesting to me is there was a point where nutrition companies didn't sponsor women, right? They sponsor guys.
Yeah.
And Paula changed all that.
Yeah.
And I remember that with Pro Optiball and that, what was the title, the name of the company? It was
Metrics?
Not Metrics. Well, Metrics as well.
Yeah.
But before that, it was, oh, look at this.
Of course.
Murphy.
Yeah.
His first rodeo, his phone goes off.
Yeah, what can you do?
I love that. So what athlete surprised you the most? An athlete who somebody said, hey, you really need to represent him or her, and you thought, oh my God, do I really need to do this? And then they were way above your expectations. Or did that even happen?
Well, maybe Lori Bowden,
Okay.
because Lori Bowden sort of came in a package with Peter Reed, and
And she was an age grouper at the time.
yeah,
Right.
and Peter was the catch.
Right.
And, you know, Lori just was sort of this happy-go-lucky, in some ways an awkward athlete.
Yeah.
And, you know, if you looked at her running style, she had that real goofy foot.
Yes.
And so, you know, I think that's the answer. Lori was just an incredible story. And that whole year, and again, Bob, I wish I could remember the years that they were going through the divorce or separated,
Yes.
and they both won
They both
Ironman.
won.
And you could just see that as that race developed, once it became apparent to Lori that Peter was going to win, well, you know, there was no way she was going to be left behind.
Right.
And that was the year, I think she ran 2:59, was the first one.
First one under 3 hours. And I also remember, I think there was probably, that might have been your toughest challenge, figuring out what to do afterwards in
Right.
terms of who was going to be on stage.
Yeah,
with
it was
who.
a very difficult night because neither would appear together for the ring ceremony.
Wow.
Which was a sort of a tradition at the
Yeah, of
award
course.
ceremony, and they wouldn't do it. And so it got to be an interesting night.
That one of the things that I think has been so important to the sport of triathlon has been, and the Ironman NBC show has been so important to growing the sport. And bringing Peter Henning on board with Challenge to me is a huge coup, and also makes a statement that the challenge is going to be about building the TV stories and building the story, the human interest stories. What is your feeling in terms of how important TV is for the Challenge series?
Well, it's funny you mention that because I think the three most important people in the development of the sport of triathlon are Tom Warren, Peter Henning, and Julie Moss.
Mm-hmm.
And
people wouldn't argue
Tom
with that.
Warren. Tom Warren doesn't mean much to people outside of San Diego that are of our generation.
Right.
But the reason I put Tom Warren in that group is that Tom made the sport seem possible to guys like me.
Right.
If it had been Tinley who was the pioneer, and Tinley was a beautiful athlete,
right.
and I might have decided, well, you have to be a special athlete to do Ironman. Yeah. But Tom was an ugly athlete.
He was.
Very ugly athlete.
His running style was
right.
horrific. Yeah.
And so the fact that Tom can do it, and he didn't seem to be Superman,
right.
told people like me that we could do it. And I think that Tom helped launch the triathlon boom in San Diego.
Yeah, no question.
And then, of course, there was, the Julie Moss story, which
right.
everybody knows, and
right.
and really, did maybe more than anything to put the sport on the map.
No question.
And then, what Peter's done is, since he took over the TV, has just been incredible in terms of the way he's been able to reach out to people and tell them basically the Tom Warren story, that this is possible, you can do it.
When you look at the 20 years of this event, it's been, last week, you've got a full festival now. You've got a race last weekend, and now you've got another race coming up this weekend. And when you look at the growth over the years, does it surprise you? And does it surprise you in terms of the growth throughout Asia of triathlon?
Look at the first race. One of the happiest moments of my entire triathlon career was when the first bike re-entered the bike to run transition area.
Knowing they found their way?
Knowing they found their way and knowing they got there safely.
Yes.
I mean, I was elated. And then
course.
when a steady stream of bikes came in,
Yeah.
I was positively over the moon.
Yeah.
And there were 270 athletes back then, which was nothing short of a miracle for a race that was here. So, it's just been this incredible ride here. But I think the thing that most people would forget about this race are maybe the most important thing that we did here was setting the race distances at odd numbers. So this was never an Olympic distance race. It was never, and I'm talking about the Laguna Phuket Triathlon that started all this. It was never a half distance race. It was this oddity.
Yeah.
And the reason that I decided to go with odd numbers is because I needed people to travel to a race, and I needed to give them something that wasn't what they could get in their backyard. Because there was no one who got out of bed in the morning, got in their car, and came to this race. Everyone here
had to fly in.
Had to fly in, and at great expense, not only financial, but to family and vacation time and everything else. And we needed to do something that was really special here. And I think that philosophy has continued through 20 years. There were times when we changed the run course every year or changed the bike course every year and to create different challenges and to keep things moving. And we don't have that much flexibility on the island anymore because the island has grown up so much and the resort has developed. So we have a course that we've lived with for the last few years, and it's a course that works for us. It works for the community, but at the same time, we try to change things up in the event so this doesn't become a bottling line. And so with Challenge coming here this year, again, we think it's part of the evolution of the event that we moved on to something else, which we assume is going to be better, and that athletes are going to walk away on Sunday afternoon and go, that was really fun, that was great, I really do want to come back.
With the pros athletes out there now, I mean, I'm not sure how involved you are with Shannon and Wendy, with PCH, if it's pretty much their ball game at this point. But are you impressed with the professional athletes out there now?
I'm only tangentially involved, but it's a lot like it's always been. There are some really quality athletes out there, and those athletes are fun to deal with and a pleasure to deal with and rewarding to deal with. Right. But there's not very many, really, that fall into that category. And unfortunately, the first generation of athletes, the Mark Allens and the Paula Newby-Frasers and the Scott Tinleys, their expectation levels were very low. This was about accomplishment, and about doing something that had never been done before, and the paycheck was just gravy. And with every generation of athlete that's come into the sport, the expectations rise. And so it's harder and harder to kind of find athletes that really do have the right perspective, or a healthy perspective in terms of really where they are in the universe.
Fascinating. When I look at the athletes, I see, the Chris McCormick and Craig Alexander, those guys are such great spokespeople, and they're great athletes, and they're dynamic, and rivalries, all that works. But at the same time, we need more. Right. We need more athletes. Do you feel it's a good time is there enough dollars out there for professional athletes? Do you see more sponsors entering into the arena?
Well, there's plenty of prize money out there. There's no question.
There's more
about
prize
that.
money than ever before, right?
And I do think that there are athletes that need to just readjust how they see themselves in the triathlon world. And there are some athletes that can win Roth and some that can't. There's some that can win in Kona and some that can't.
Right.
And there are some athletes that are short distance athletes and some that are long distance athletes. And I think that more athletes need to be true to themselves and honest with themselves and say, this is who I am. There's plenty of opportunity out there to make a living. How do I make that living? There was a Metaman race in Bintan, with lots of money and no one showed up. And there are athletes because the athletes that should have been cashing those paychecks are running around trying to do things that they probably aren't equipped to do. But in the back of their mind, they feel like
I've got to get
to be an accepted pro, or to be this kind of pro, or to be whatever their dream is. That they need to go run after races where they're probably losing money and not making money. So maybe we need pros that are better mathematicians than they are athletes.
How important is Challenge Atlantic City for the franchise? Because at this point, that'll be the first event in the U.S.
It's huge for us, and it's an event that was really ahead of our schedule in terms of how we had sort of scheduled out the build out of North America. Right. But the opportunity there was so good that we couldn't pass it up.
Sure.
So we accelerated our plans in order to accommodate Atlantic City. I have a tick list of 10 items that I look for when I go to events, and Atlantic City ticked all 10 boxes.
Wow. And
when I walked away from there, that's exactly what I said. I said, wow, we couldn't ask for a better place and a better opportunity, not only with the city and the race course and where it's located, but also to have Vigorito and Stephen Del Monte on board to operate that event for us.
Very good race director.
Just go down the list, tick, 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 tick. We have to do this event.
And what will people see on that course? That's a fast course, right?
Well, what they're going to see, and one of the reasons we're in Atlantic City is that if you don't know Atlantic City, you're going to be really surprised at what you find. Before I went, I thought it was a concrete jungle, courtesy of The Sopranos.
Yes.
And it's really anything but. It doesn't take much to get out of Atlantic City on a bicycle. And once you're out in Atlantic City, you're into some dreamscape cycling areas.
Wow.
Just fabulous roads, twisty, turny, up and down, nothing too hilly, but just really interesting roads that have history. You go by all these sort of historical homes. You're going to go through the blueberry capital of the world. And so the bike ride is one of those rides where it's the kind of ride you want to get up in the morning and you want to go do. And then the run, the swim is completely sheltered, so we're not going to have any issues with the swim, which is always a plus in this day and age.
Absolutely.
And the run is going to be on that historic boardwalk, which has been completely redone since Hurricane Sandy, and finishing in front of historic Boardwalk Hall, which is the most iconic building in Atlantic City. And we expect really a huge turnout, because there's been an interesting dynamic in Atlantic City. Some years ago, Atlantic City lost the Miss America pageant, which was their iconic signature event. They lost it to Vegas. And I think the community had come to just take it for granted.
Yeah.
And Miss America came back to Atlantic City this year, and the Miss America parade on the boardwalk drew 250,000 spectators.
Wow.
And it was the community pouring out to say, we get it now.
We want it.
We understand what events are about, and we expect that some of that spillover will benefit our event as well.
Love that. Other plans in the U.S.? Anything?
Yeah, nothing I can talk about, but
nobody's watching, Murph.
Yeah.
It's just me and you.
Yeah.
Come on, just ignore that camera thing. You'll be fine.
We have the U.S. is a place where you just can't. You can't meddle around. You have to come in,
and you have to do it right.
And it absolutely has to be done right. And what we need right now is to put Atlantic City in the books, and to send everybody to send everybody home with a brand message, so they understand what Challenge is about, what the differences are in Challenge. And that's really the start of our campaign in the U.S. Going forward, we do have very ambitious plans.
What impressed me in Roth was obviously the crowds, obviously the beer mile, obviously the Solarborg Hill, and all of that impressed me. But what impressed me the most was having a Ironman distance event with a relay. I love that. I thought it brought a lot of brand new people in. And Atlantic City has that as well, correct?
Right, we do that. And what we find out with relays are that we bring in swimmers, runners, and cyclists, and we send home triathletes. And that's vital to the growth of our sport. And we just announced in Atlantic City that we're going to do an aquathon.
Oh, aquathon.
No, on aquabike, sorry.
Aquabike, okay.
Sorry, aquabike.
Oh, swim bike.
And aquabike is something that USAT came to us and said, would you do this? It's a
perfect
program
for
that they're trying
City.
to pioneer.
Yep.
And because we have really unlimited capacity on the course in Atlantic City, we had the room to open up another couple hundred slots and see how that goes. It's an experiment for us, but we're really interested to see how it goes.
You know, there's so many folks out there, my age, I'm so much older than you,
You
who
are.
can swim and bike, who can swim and bike, but running is really tough, especially you start talking about a full marathon, but be able to be part of it, to be in the game and be able to do a Ironman distance event, iron distance event like that and not have to run 26.2 miles is pretty sweet.
Yeah, well, Vigorito is very, very passionate about it. And he was just a force to be reckoned with. I mean, he was just not going to take no for an answer once USAT expressed some interest.
Love that.
So, you know, he just says in the Mid-Atlantic region, there's a lot of interest in this, and I guess we're going to find out.
So, Murph, 20 years ago, you were swimming out here, and I'm sure when people saw you swimming, did they feel, oh, well, everybody swims out here, or were they chasing you in boats?
No, this was a reclaimed copper mine, and I don't think anyone had ever swum in it. And I went for a swim, and all the lifeguards and everyone was in an uproar here.
Yeah.
And but that broke the dike, so to speak. That once that happened, then they started using these the lagoons. They have them tested twice a year, and the water's clean. And I mean, there was a rumor of a crocodile here in the lagoon a few years ago, but we haven't had any crocodile sightings recently. And you know, but I was talking to McCormick last night, and you know, he says that this race is really the two body of water swim. In his mind, that's what it'll always be. And that was really sort of a stroke of luck / stroke of genius to be able to do that, to swim out in the Andaman Sea and then cross the beach and then finish in the lagoon. It's just a real trademark of this event.
And what's the feel when you do that? When you go from the salt water to as a swimmer?
Well, I haven't done it. I've been here 20 years and never done the event. I've never had the good fortune to be able to do it. But I think what I heard Belinda Granger made some comment last night that it I mean, the way I understood her comment was it's basically like taking your wetsuit off.
Yeah, love that.
So you get the flotation out in the sea, and you lose all that flotation in the fresh water.
Well, Murph, congrats on all this. I mean, your vision of coming here, and now 20 years later, thousands of people are racing all over Asia. It's really grown the sport.
Yeah, thanks, Bob.
All right. Again, we're at the Challenge Laguna Phuket Triathlon. My name is Bob Babbitt. This is Breakfast with Bob. The triathlon is coming up this Sunday, December 1st. Our guest has been Murphy Reinschreiber. We will be on triathlete.com. Hold on, everyone. We will be right back.